Shalom and welcome to Secrets Revealed, the Holy Bible. Today we're going to look at Genesis chapter 41. There are 57 verses. Beginning in verse 2, we see here the word sedge. This is what the cows were eating. 7 good cows, the 7 healthy cows, the beautiful cows. They're eating sedge. What is sedge? Well, I'm going to tell you in a little bit. Masoretic says meadow. So sedge is essentially, it is marsh plants. They are marsh plants that grow near the water, near bodies of water. And since it is Egypt, it would be near the river. It says there in verse 1 explicitly, he was standing at the bank of the river, or he stood by the river, or actually it says upon the river. So that's where he was. That's where the cows came out. They came out of, and they fed on the sedge. A meadow is very different than sedge because a meadow does not have a body of water, and they are different vegetation altogether. They're not the same plants. So that's an important difference to make if we're being very scientific about it and presenting it in the court of law. Verse 3 says, the other 7 cows came out of the river, were ill-favored and lean-fleshed. But what I'm looking at here is that the other cows fed by, it says they fed by the other cows. So the Masoretic says they stood by. It doesn't say they were eating, it just says they were there. They just existed. They were not doing anything. Whereas the Septuagint says, well, these other cows that were not healthy were eating near them. They were eating along with them. Perhaps deceitfully eating there, because we can see later on that's not what they were interested in. They weren't interested in eating the vegetation at all. Verse 4 says ears. That's the other dream that Pharaoh had. He dreamed about ears. Not corn. So barley did not exist, or I should say corn did not exist in those days. Actually, it's verse 5. Verse 5 is where it says ears. So ears are not corn, they are barley. Corn did not exist in that area of the world at that time in ancient Egypt. That's only a crop that came from North America and is native to North America. So they didn't have that in the Middle East and not in Egypt. So it was not corn. It's important to keep in mind that when we read the word corn in the Bible, it actually means barley. It's better translated as barley, since in the Middle East and at that time, like I said, corn does not exist in that area. You will not get corn at all. It's not native to that area. It doesn't come from there. It comes from North America. So they didn't have corn in that area. It is barley. Okay, enough about that. Verse 8 says, Pharaoh was troubled, so he called on the interpreters of Mizraim. Verses, he called for all the magicians of Egypt. Well, this always puzzled me. I thought, okay, why would he call magicians? Because they just know it all? It makes more sense that he called interpreters of dreams. So these are specialists. That's what they do. They interpret dreams. Verse 15 says, hear. So I have heard. Well, that's not what he said. It says here, I have heard concerning you that you did hear dreams and interpret them, versus that you can understand a dream to interpret it. No, it's hearing and understanding. Well, maybe that's a similar concept, scripturally speaking. When you hear something, you actually understand it. So Maybe it's tied in, or maybe they are separate. Maybe it's just that he can hear and interpret. So hearing and interpreting is different than understanding and interpreting. Possibly it's just redundant to understand and interpret. It's hearing the dream, meaning not just being able to hear it. And I don't mean simply hear with your ear. I mean to be able to decipher, so you can hear the message of the dream, correctly hear it. So someone could say, okay, these are cows, but you're saying, no, that's not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing something different. Or it could just mean that, for example, if Pharaoh said, I'm not going to tell you the dream, he can hear the dream. He doesn't need you to tell him. He just knows. So it could be that. Verse 16 says, Joseph answered to Pharaoh and said, without Elohim, an answer of safety shall not be given to Pharaoh. Versus, it is not in me. Elohim shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. So it actually doesn't say it's not in me, because that would imply that he doesn't have the Holy Spirit. Like Elohim isn't working with him. Obviously, Elohim is working in him, and he has favor with Elohim and man. So he's correct to say, without Elohim, an answer of safety shall not be given to Pharaoh, an answer that is good, that he would want to hear, or the interpretation of the dream. In any case, it doesn't say it is not in me, but it's true that Elohim will give him an answer of peace, or an answer. Verse 16, we just read that. Verse 19 says, evil. So these cows, it says, describes them as evil in the Septuagint. The Masoretic calls them poor. So evil can be calamitous, it can be evil, versus poor. How can cows be poor? Do they not have money, or they're already described as ill and lean flesh, so how are they destitute of health? Maybe in poor health, maybe that's what it meant, but it says they're evil. So that can mean calamitous, it can mean actually evil, like they're bad. And we can see what they did. They actually cannibalized and ate the other cows. So they were in fact evil, because cows are herbivores, they're not supposed to eat meat. So that could be the interpretation of the word evil, because they're not doing as they're supposed to, as they were designed, as they were created to eat plants. They ate meat. But how can they eat meat if their teeth are flat? Maybe in this dream they were zombie cows and they had sharp teeth. So you have the description of them. Evil, ill-favored, and lean flesh. Let me just show you some pictures here of what I found in my image search. So you have this picture. That's what I kind of imagined them as, but a lot thinner. So maybe their bones were showing. I don't know. It's speculation on my part. And then this is the image I'm using for the thumbnail. Maybe they had sharp teeth. But Pharaoh would definitely be troubled. I would be troubled to see cows looking like that and eating normal cows. That would trouble you for sure. And then he saw the same thing with the barley. Barley eating barley. How can barley eat barley? They don't have mouths, so maybe his imagination ran wild. I don't know. It's in the vision. Okay, so that's all for the cow part. Verse 21, I slept. See, it says here, after I awoke, I slept. So Pharaoh woke up from that first dream and he slept again. But here it just says, so I awoke and I saw in my dreams. Okay, so how did he see in his dream if he's awake? It only makes sense if he slept again. And that's what the Septuagint says, that he did in fact sleep again. Verse 23 says, close to them. So these 7 ears, the thin ones, the ones blasted with the wind, the ones that were not, they were not good, they were not healthy, sprang up close to them. Here in the Masoretic, it's not even, doesn't say that they sprang up close to them, just that they sprang up after them in their order. It doesn't say where they were in proximity to the other barley. And I have to say that the word withered is also added. It was not in the original Septuagint that they were withered. They were thin and blasted with the wind. That's about it. That's all it gives us. Verse 24 says, explain. There was no one to explain it to me. Pharaoh talking about this dream, no one to explain it, versus no one could declare it. So similar. But I think explain is more interpret the dream, whereas declare can just be, okay, tell me what I dreamt. Let me declare it to you. Let me tell you the facts, not giving an interpretation. So an explanation to me sounds different than a declaration. Verse 32 says, because the saying which is from Elohim. It says here, why he dreamt it twice is because the saying which is from Elohim shall be true, and Elohim will hasten to accomplish it, versus because the thing is established by Elohim, and Elohim will shortly bring it to pass. So we can see a difference here is that it's not just that Elohim established it, it's because it is from him, yes, but it shall be true. It will happen. That's a difference than just establishing it. In a dream, it actually becomes real. That's what he's saying there. Verse 33, wise and prudent. Look for a, it says wise in the Masoretic as well, but it doesn't say prudent, it says discreet. So discreet can mean different things. It can mean someone who's subtle, someone who's secret, someone who isn't loud, someone who does things in secrecy, who does things subtly, but isn't obnoxious about things. But a prudent man is someone who's very careful. So those are two different words being used there. Verse 34 says, the fifth part of all the produce of the land of Egypt or Mizraim was taken up during the years of plenty. Here it just says a fifth part of the land. It doesn't say produce of the land, just the land. So it sounds like they're land grabbing, or it's all about real estate. But no, it's about produce. It's about food. What are they going to eat? So that's a distinction to make. Verse 40 says, and all my people shall be obedient to your word. This is Pharaoh speaking to Joseph. They will obey you. The Septuagint. Masoretic says, according to your word shall all my people be ruled. So they're going to be ruled according to what he says. Doesn't say they'll be obedient. You can be ruled but still not be obedient. No, they're going to obey your word. And I'm sure it says there that many verses, many different texts as well, that Joseph was loved among the people. He was a good ruler. He wasn't an oppressor or a dictator. He was a compassionate, good ruler. And Elohim, he gave him favor, not just with Elohim, but with also men, with also the people themselves. Verse 42 says that Pharaoh gave him a necklace of gold, but I always pictured a chain because it says a gold chain. Nowadays you see musicians wearing chains around their neck, even in the 90s, but it was actually a necklace. And you can see that in ancient Egyptian art and even artifacts that they did have necklaces. I don't think they were chains, but they were just, very beautiful, ornate jewelry. Verse 43 says, a herald made a proclamation before him. So whenever he traveled, there's someone saying, hey, here comes the prime minister, here comes the second command. Versus the Masoretic, which says, and they cried before him, bow the knee. I always thought, who are they? It's just something random people are yelling, bow the knee. No, it's actually a herald. It's a designated officer. It's someone who is appointed to do this and he's usually with Joseph to accompany him so that people pay him respect because maybe they're not aware that he's around or before he arrives, kind of thing. Verse 44 says, foot. Without you, no one shall lift up his hand. Okay, so that's fine. But here it says hand or foot. They add foot in the Masoretic. Okay, his name was changed, or not changed, but he called his name Son Tham Phanech versus Zaphnath Paneah. So very different. I wouldn't say they're equal or identical, they're very different, but multisyllabic. And he was given Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, or Potipharah. See, I'm not sure if Potipharah is the same as Potiphar, or they just have similar names, because my speculation is that this Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, who became his wife, was the daughter of Zelicah, the woman who wanted to have sex with Joseph. So, maybe she was attractive after all, and Joseph stayed strong, and he eventually got the daughter instead of the older woman. So Joseph was rewarded, and anyway, it says he's the priest of Heliopolis versus the priest of On. Very different. And then you have a redundancy here. It says Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. And verse 46, it doesn't say in the Septuagint, notice, but it does say that in the Septuagint, verse 46, and went through all the land of Mizraim. And it repeats it again in the Masoretic. Why? That's redundant. It doesn't have to say that twice. Verse 49 says, until it could not be numbered. This is the food they set aside, the barley. They gathered very much until it could not be numbered, versus very much until he left numbering. So it sounds like they did count, but they just left it alone. They just finished it, and then for it was out without number. So they counted to a certain point, and then we just can't count anymore. So anyway, that's the way I read it. Verse 52 says, the land of my humiliation is after the second son. You'll notice that in the Septuagint, we'll use humiliation versus affliction. But either way, it's a humbling. Verse 55, why did the Egyptians run out of food? Okay, so this isn't a difference. It's more a question. Because it says here, the people of Egypt cried to Pharaoh for bread. But we see that earlier in the chapter, they actually set aside food in the cities. That's a commandment, not to grocery stores, because they didn't have those back then. It was to people themselves, because most of civilization was an agrarian society before the industrial age. So people had their own farms. They didn't have to depend on anyone to set aside food for them. But this was a remarkable, unique circumstance, that it's not just harvest like a normal harvest. This is a famine for not just a year, but 7 years. So they got to set aside a lot. And you can be sure these people heard about it, either from Joseph or word of mouth. It spread throughout Egypt, and people did store their personal supply for 7 years. And they ended up running out of food, because once the famine hit, it says here that the land of Egypt was hungry. The people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And so they went to Joseph, and he opened the storehouses to the Egyptians, and he sold to them. So let me look into another source. Okay, so I'm looking at the book of Jasher in chapter 48, and it talks about how Pharaoh did have those dreams indeed, and he called interpreters or magicians, but they were interpreters, and they couldn't interpret his dream, and he killed them. He had a command that they would kill them. So they started killing them, and that's why this chief butler named Merod remembered Joseph and said, "Hey, there's actually a guy who can interpret dreams," and he did this because, well, they were killing Egyptians, specifically these interpreters, and they're slaughtering him. So he had to do something, and I guess that was a wake up call for him to do something because people are being killed. Um, I'm going to continue reading on. Yeah, there's really so much in this book of Jasher regarding this account of Genesis 41. I can't really do it justice, but I'll just kind of scan over some things. So, for example, there was a stairway up to Pharaoh, and every language you speak, you could go up a certain amount of steps. But it was known that Joseph could speak Hebrew, and but he couldn't speak Egyptian, so he could only go up a certain amount of steps. But through divine providence, Jehovah gave him the ability to speak 70 languages, all the languages of the earth at that point. So he was given that, according to the book of Jasher at least, the ability to do that. So he was able to go all the way up to the highest step and to speak with Pharaoh. That's how they knew he had, there's something special about this guy. And then he told them the interpretation um, of the dreams. And actually, there was some doubt from Pharaoh in the book of Jasher regarding the veracity of Joseph's ability to interpret dreams. And Joseph said, "Okay, if you don't believe me, then the child you have, your wife will give birth to a son. Uh, your firstborn that has been born will die, but you'll be comforted because you're going to have a son to replace that child, basically." And so that came to pass. It came to pass on that very day, it says, that the queen bare a son, and the king heard about the son, and he rejoiced. But then the bad news came that his firstborn had died. So he knew that this isn't a regular guy. He spoke very accurately, and it was life and death, and it really affected his life. So they also instructed people to set aside food. Let me read how it happened that they didn't have any food. Yeah, so the verse where Joseph says, or the statement he makes, and saying, he should appoint a wise, prudent man. Pharaoh wanted to appoint Joseph, but they said, what disqualifies him is that he only speaks Hebrew, doesn't speak our language, doesn't speak the 70 languages. But when he was able to, given the gift of tongues, to speak all those languages, that, it really pleased Pharaoh and all his people that it was Joseph, because they wanted to make it him originally, but that was the only limitation. But, Elohim provided for him in that situation. So we see here, this is, I believe, Jasher 49 now, chapter 49. And it talks about their food. Let me look further. Hold on for one moment. So in chapter 50, it says that they did set aside the barley, and Joseph commanded they should bring in the barley in the ears, and also bring it with some of the soil in the field so it should not spoil, and to heap them up, the barley like the sand of sea, and they should store it with the soil. But they did it in a specific way, possibly even storing it underground so that it wouldn't be not just exposed to the elements, but also to vermin and animals, insects that want to eat it. And notice he said explicitly, specifically, to heap it up, collect it in the ear. So don't take it out, keep it in its, natural packaging, so to speak. Uh, so if we continue on seeing um, where the famine started, it just started and the people opened up their stores of food. And it says here in verse 20, of chapter 50, they found all the food, the people of Egypt, they found all the food that was in their storage full of vermin and not fit to eat. And the famine prevailed throughout the land. And the inhabitants of Egypt, the Egyptians, came and cried before Pharaoh, for the famine was heavy upon them. And Pharaoh, they said to Pharaoh, give food to your servants. Why shall we die through hunger before your eyes, even we and our little ones? And Pharaoh answered them, saying, why do you cry to me? Did not Joseph command that the corn should be laid up during the 7 years of plenty for the years of famine? And why did you not listen to his voice? And the people of Egypt answered the king, saying, as your soul lives, our Lord, your servants have done all that Joseph ordered. For your servants also gathered in all the produce of their fields during the 7 years of plenty, and laid it in the stores unto this day. And when the famine prevailed, we opened our stores, and behold, all our produce was filled with vermin, was not fit for food. So the king was greatly afraid on account of the famine. He was terrified. And the king answered and said, well, since this happened to you, go to Joseph, and whatever he says to you, you do it. Don't transgress his commands. So they came to Joseph and said to him, give to us food, why should we die? When Joseph heard it, he opened all the food and gave it to them. He sold it, so they had to buy it. So that's the story of what happened from the book of Jasher. It makes sense why that would happen, because you can be sure a country or a government or a nation would give its citizens ample opportunity, ample warning to prepare for a coming crisis, and that they wouldn't be caught unawares or unprepared, because that's a lot of resources to provide. So if they can provide for themselves, you have your own emergency uh, stock. So I find that very interesting. The book of Jasher gives us a more complete picture. Without it, we're very much grasping for straws, wondering, okay, what happened? This doesn't make sense. Now it does. So again, I'm not saying book of Jasher, Enoch, and Jubilees are at the same level as the Torah. They definitely are not. But we would be amiss if we don't keep an open mind and at least consider what is written, and at least consider this could be true, it could be false, but measure it by Torah. If it contradicts the Torah, if there's something there that goes against what the will of Elohim is, against what we've already read in the Tanakh, in the New Testament, then it's false. But from what I've read in Jasher and Jubilees and Enoch and a lot of the other books, pseudepigraphal books, non-canonical books, it doesn't contradict what I've learned, what I believe, what is written in the Tanakh and the Torah. And it's one to add, there's another book as well, pseudepigraphal book. I believe it's called Joseph and Asenath. Basically, it's a story of how Joseph and his wife met and became husband and wife, and their story there. So I've been planning to read that. I haven't read it yet, but I just noticed it yesterday. So I'm going to make a mental note to start reading that. So that's all I have to say about this chapter of Genesis 41. Again, thank you for your time. Let me just make sure that I did read it all. Okay. Oh, I didn't finish it all. Okay. Well, thank you for your time. Jehovah bless you. Make your way prosperous. I'm not going to sign off yet. I'm just going to finish the rest of this. Okay. Why did they run out of food? So 56 said, the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. Okay. So in verse 56, I almost left this out, but it says, the famine was on all the face of the earth. The Masoretic says, it waxed sore in the land of Egypt. But it says in the previous, just earlier in the same verse, it was all over all the face of the earth. Why is the land of Egypt its own planet? It doesn't have to say Egypt if it's all the earth. All the earth is every country. So I find that not really needed, that word there, or that section of the verse. And then 57 says, all the countries of the earth. came to Egypt to buy, parentheses, corn. Well, that's not really there, so to buy. And then the second half of the Septuagint says, the famine prevailed in all the earth, versus in all lands. So, it's not just lands, it's the whole planet. It really was sore. It was really a bad famine. So that's all I have to say for this chapter. Again, this is Jack Knight signing off for Secrets Revealed, the Holy Bible. Shalom. Until next time, we'll look at Genesis chapter 42.